Welcome students. Today we are going to start a new chapter, that is ratio and proportion. So the topics to be covered in this chapter will be introduction, why ratio, comparing quantities with ratios, then we will discuss proportion, then unitary method, and then problem solving with ratio and proportion. Now let's first try to understand what is ratio and proportions. So basically, where do we need ratio and proportion? As we gradually move ahead with chapter, we'll get to know what is ratio, how do we use it. We'll also get to know what is proportion. Let's first see where do we need them. Let's look at this example. So these are two sisters, and let's say we are interested to know who is taller. Now, of course, looking at the picture, you can say, ma'am, this one is taller or that one is shorter. So, by looking at the picture, you can say who's taller. But let's go by measurements. Let's say the elder sister named Maria um, is 138 centimeter tall, and the name of younger sister is Rita, and say height of Rita is 125 centimeter. Now, looking at these two numbers, you need to decide who is taller. Now, who is taller will be decided by numbers, and which one number is bigger, whether it's 138 or 125, whichever is bigger, that person is going to be taller. So in this case, 138 is greater than 125. So we can say that Maria is taller because 138 is greater. So in this case, we are comparing the height of two sisters. Now, if I ask you how much is Maria taller than Rita, that means now we are not looking at just a mere comparison, but here also we are looking for by how much is the difference. If I ask you how tall is Maria when compared to Rita, so that comparison, how do you do that comparison? Now, one way of doing that comparison is you find the difference between these two numbers. That could be the option first. Option 1. So 138 minus 125 and you will get 13. So you say that Maria is 13 centimeter taller than Rita. So that is one way of comparing Maria's height with respect to Rita's height. Now, there could be another option where you actually find out the ratio of Maria's height to Rita's height. So you find out Maria's height divided by Rita's height. And you say that Maria is 138 by 125 times taller than Rita. So that is another way of comparing their heights. Maybe that's getting too much in the first slide. So, okay, in this lesson, we are basically going to compare two quantities. Now, not only compare in the sense greater than or less than, we're also going to talk about how much is one quantity with respect to other quantity. So, some comparison is going to happen in this lesson. Let's look at one more example. Here, we see that Mr. and Mrs. Sim are going on a long drive. And for some time, Mr. Sim drove the car, and for some of the time, Mrs. Sim drove the car. So, say Mrs. Sim drove the car for 3/4 of the distance. So, whatever goes the total distance, 3/4 of that distance was covered by Mrs. Sim, and the remaining 1/4 of distance is covered by Mr. Sim. So, what is this 3 by 4 and 1 by 4? 3/4 and 1/4 are nothing but fractions because they are not whole. So, they are telling the part of a whole. 3/4 of the complete distance. So, these are the these are the examples of fractions. Now, if I ask you to compare the distance covered by Mrs. Sim with the distance covered by Mr. Sim, now if I ask you who covered more distance, so for that we need to compare these two fractions, 3 by 4 and 1 by 4. And we see that 3 by 4 is greater than 1 by 4, right? Because Mrs. Sim drove car for 3 parts out of 4 parts, and Mr. Sim drove car for 1 part out of 4 parts. So 3 by 4 is greater. Therefore, Mrs. Sim covered more distance. That's fine. But now, when we are going to deep into comparison, I will ask you that how much distance was covered by Mrs. Simth with respect to Mr. Simth. Now, how would you compare the distance covered by Mrs. Simth with Mr. Simth? How would you do that comparison? Now, look into these. You can see that Mrs. Simth covered 3 times the distance covered by Mr. Simth. So, if Mr. Simth covered 1 by 4, then Miss Simth covered 3 into 1 by 4, and that is 3 by 4. So, there we talk about ratio. Because when you say this, what you what you are basically doing when you are saying that distance covered by Mrs. Simth divided by distance covered by Mr. Simth, that's what you are actually doing in this case. So you are comparing the two quantities by division. So you are dividing the two quantities to find the comparison, that how much distance did Mrs. Simth covered compared to Mr. Simth. So Mrs. Simth covered 3 times the distance covered by Mr. Simth. So this sort of comparison, what we discussed is ratio. Thank you.